I just actually tweeted this out. I think that was, I do a lot of these events, as you can imagine, and see a lot of the emerging tech conversations and discussions, and I think that was one of the best applications. There's a lot of like talk about what 3D printing can do, and I think that was just such an amazing application of the way it can. I mean, the story about the VA patient from Alaska. I mean, you really see what it can do. So I just really commend her. I think that was one of the best presentations I've seen on 3D printing and the applications and advancements for it. So thank you, Beth. I also want to note that we've had some great engagement on social media. So be sure to keep, tweeting your thoughts at #EmergingTechSummit. And so now I want to introduce our next session, Federal Vision 2030, presented by Accenture. I want to welcome Dominic Delmolino, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Accenture Federal Services, and he's going to share some exclusive research on how federal agencies are embracing emerging technology. So please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Okay, thank you so much. My name again is Dominic Delmolino. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Accenture Federal Services. And this morning I've really been inspired by some of the great examples of technology and innovation being done at several agencies. And so what I thought I'd share with you is some research that Accenture has done globally with our Fortune 50 clients in the commercial space, and how we've also applied that same research to federal agencies. I'm going to begin with an example or a vision that we have assembled to talk about 4 trends that are coming and about to be impacting federal agencies, and how those can be, how you can prepare yourselves for these trends as they're coming, and how you can then adopt and adapt to them when they're here. So we talked a little bit earlier about how much disruption is going on in terms of new technology appearing, and it's almost coming faster than we know how to deal with it. So our ability to be ready to adapt to new technology as it comes, we're going to have some assistance and be prepared, not just in our ability to understand technology, but how it changes us and how we can adapt to it when it gets here. But the nice thing is this gives us an opportunity to really reinvent how we posture ourselves for these new trends as they occur. And I've got 4 trends I want to go through relatively quickly, and then talk about what that means in terms of being prepared to handle and address these trends as they get to us. This portion, the graph on the left, is probably something we've seen again and again. Every time you talk about the data growth of people creating data and uploading data, this graph looks the same every time you see it. But one of the things I found very fascinating about the fact that this trend continues to accelerate is it used to be we'd be in the era of big data and we'd say, how do we find that needle in the haystack, right? There's a lot of noise, I want to find the signal. Now we have a variety and a multitude of signals to deal with. So not only is the noise value that much larger, but the amount of signals we deal with is that much larger as well. Jose this morning mentioned that behavioral identity, 240 different signals. So in theory, yes, I could go and measure your head and look in your iris and take your fingerprint and look at your gait and manually identify things about you that would let me feel confident that I know who you are. But I can't do that for 240 different traits as a person. Right? So I'm going to need help. I'm going to need our AI brethren to help us understand, not only get the signal from the noise, but all of the signals from the noise and how to interpret them. Trust is also something that's become extremely important with this amount of data. So now I have all this data. I have signals that I've identified. Are those signals valid? Have they been tampered with? Do I know where they've come from? And we can see in this picture here, the research we've uncovered is that the dependence and reliance on that data coming into us from the internet and other sources keeps growing, but our trust in whether or not it's accurate, it keeps decreasing. And so the key here is, how do we continue to make sure that when we interact, when we provide data, that we can up the trust factor? And who do we work with to help make sure that we've secured that supply chain of information? I really like the examples. The 3D printing one was really inspiring, wasn't it? What they can do there at the VA. And this really goes to this other trend here about what we call virtual being the new face of government. Not just in the physical operating room, but that virtual ability to not only do VR, but also virtually look at that 3D image of the options that are necessary to conduct that kind of surgery. And not only is that something useful, but the technological implications of wider use of virtual technology means that bandwidth is going to be extremely highly consumed. You heard the story about the images being sent down, the printing being done on site. And so the amount of data being transferred, right, has exploded. right? And it's not just the person moving, but also the data associated with that person moving. So the infrastructure to move that data around is going to continue to be something that's critical as the immersive experiences like the ones we saw earlier become the norm. And then last trend really is how authentic can we make these experiences? We want to make sure that when we're dealing with someone, there's that trust factor we talked about earlier on the data, but we also want people to feel like the interaction is personal, authentic, and individual. Again, you saw examples of that this morning. A contracting specialist who's trying to work on a procurement has this ability now to say, I want to know what I'm working on authentically, and so I can gather all the information I need to personalize the right I'm going to do. Or in the 3D printing example, you had the example of how can I personalize something for that patient so they feel like that interaction is authentically dealing with them as an individual. And so this high level of authenticity in the interaction is another trend that we're seeing accelerating between government and citizens, government and the workforce. Okay, so I mentioned that there's these 4 trends coming, but change associated with these trends gives you opportunity to reinvent your agency in a way that adapts to these new trends. We've got a larger framework for this in the entire Federal Vision report that's based on this research, but today I'm going to focus on the first 2, which is innovation, which we heard in some of the examples, and how your people can be prepared to adapt and adopt that innovation. The first is creating a living culture, a culture of dynamic readiness. When we talk to our commercial clients, they're all worried about remaining relevant with their customers. Government agencies don't have to worry about being relevant, but they do have to worry about being ready to adapt to some of these trends. And how do you do that when some of these trends are extremely disruptive? Well, one of the ways you can do that is to create what we call a dynamic, ready culture, one that has what we call high vitality. We have experience with this in the commercial world with some of our clients like Carnival Cruise Lines, who are continually trying to reinvent themselves to stay relevant for their passengers. They want high-touch, authentic experiences between crew and guests, and they're doing that through a variety of digital and physical ways and reinventing how they form those experiences. We're seeing it here in Federal with the Navy. Just up the street, we do this in our digital studio, where the Navy has looked at reimagining some of their digital experiences and doing this in a human-centric way. I read this morning in Wired magazine that the Navy is moving from digital control panels back to some physical throttles. Why? Because they took a human-centered approach to re-examining how that interface should work. It's not all about turning everything digital, but it's about keeping that human at the center when you design an experience to adapt either new technology or upgrade older technology so it's fit for purpose for today. Okay, so how do you make sure that your agency has achieved this level of dynamic readiness? And it's something we call cultural vitality, an energy that's associated with an agency. In the commercial world, this is important as well. They have this energy and vitality with their individuals, with their workforce, so they're ready to adapt to changing customer needs. How do we do that in government? It's through something we call living government and agencies with high vitality. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've seen from agencies that exhibit high vitality and how they perform. So how important is it? In the survey we did of over 200 government officials, we asked them questions like, are you ready to adapt and respond to disruption in the next few years? And we have these measures of vitality, and we found agencies that scored high on these components of vitality felt like they were more ready to adapt and adopt disruption and prepared to handle disruption when it occurs. Not only were they ready to handle disruption, but the high vitality agencies also felt like they were more effective and more ready to handle these new things and more effective at performing their current roles, over 11 times more effective than the laggards in the survey. All right, so I talked a lot about vitality. Having high vitality makes you ready, makes you effective, and makes you able to handle disruptive technology when it gets to you. So what is that? What are the characteristics of vitality? How can you measure and assess that within your agency? What we found is high vitality agencies score very high on these 5 dimensions. They're creative. They embrace and look at new value and new models, new ways to engage. Things like that blockchain level of understanding the different contracting paperwork cycle. That's a new model that's being adopted by a high vitality agency. Human-centric. Again, what's necessary for that individual to be empowered? How do you empower individuals to feel like they're the point of your exercise? You build efficiency and trust. How do you validate and make sure that that experience is authentic, the data is secure, and it's something you can rely on? And then how do you scale? How do you open up so that you get innovation not only within your own agency, but with partners, with contractors, with the public, with the people you engage with? And then finally, how do you engage your own culture to be ready to adapt? How do you make sure that your workforce is allowed to fail, is allowed to experiment, is allowed and empowered to make decisions, so that when you're at the cash register and you show them a better price, they have the authority, they have the ability right there to adapt and respond to that situation by saying, yeah, we'll meet that price. That's delegated, empowered authority at the front line. So how do we do that in the government context? We do that by engaging our culture and empowering them to be able to do that. This is a little more complicated slide, so I'm trying to distill a couple different things from the research here. But I really found it fascinating that not only do agencies and leaders in particular find very they place a lot of emphasis on things in these vitality areas, the ones that have high effectiveness and high readiness. But not only do they outperform the laggards, they also outweight on importance. So the dashed lines to me were the most fascinating ones in this depiction. And they say, okay, the laggards recognize that these vitality areas are important, and they show you the relative importance of each area as assessed by each group. But the leaders aren't even satisfied with their own level of performance. They even think that these things are even more important. So they know they're outperforming, but they also place even a higher emphasis on continuing to increase their ability to excel in those 5 vitality areas. So for me, that was kind of fascinating. Leaders aren't satisfied with just being effective. They want to continue to be more effective and be more ready as new trends appear. So we've got a framework for each of those 5 areas. We've assessed ability of agencies to adapt in each of these areas, and we understand some of the characteristics that are exhibited for each of these 5 vitality areas. Balancing the core, so making sure you keep the engine running, but adapting to new paths dynamically. Understanding how citizens have expectations and the workforce have expectations of how things change. How do you optimize costs in one location and shift their savings into other locations so you can invest in innovation? How do you modernize at the same time so that you don't have core systems that are holding you back? How do you make sure that you design in a human-centric way? How do you make sure that these experiences are personalized, they're new, and they're tailored for the individual? How do you take things like new technologies like artificial intelligence? We all know now about how to create an LSTM-RNN from this morning's discussion. So, how do I take something like that and use AI to do something that I couldn't do before? How do I make sure that I'm doing data-driven decision-making? How do I rely on the data and trust that the data I have is useful and can be applied in a sense? How do I prototype and scale new experiences, right? How do I make sure that when I do build things, they're done in a way that increases efficiency and increases trust in that new technology? How do I scale a technology? How do I interact with my ecosystem partners, with my vendor partners, my contracting partners, my workforce, the variety of partners I have who can accelerate and scale my ability to perform? Again, this morning we heard about how do I take a workforce that might be 3,000, 20,000 individuals that have to engage in a new form of doing something. How do I provide them with an ability to do their work? So one fascinating thing we're seeing about the revolution in artificial intelligence is that in the past we had to train everybody what keystrokes were necessary for them to do their job with the system we've just deployed. The change that's occurring is that systems are now adapting to the individual. So I don't have to train an individual, I train a system to work the way individuals want. And sometimes those system experiences now can even be personalized and individual. What do I need to do my job, and how does the system support what I need to do, instead of me having to learn what keystrokes and how to make the system do what I want it to do. And then lastly, engaging the culture and organization. How do you infuse a mindset that has customer first, that has workforce first, that has citizen first? You foster a culture that has improved performance, engaging the organizational structures that focus on this, and then equip the workforce with the skills needed for the future. One of the things I'm proud about is one of the co-sponsors here. You have Pluralsight outside. Again, what's the process and plan for upskilling and giving people the opportunity to learn more in a digital fashion? Because right now the old chalkboard and classroom kind of thing isn't going to scale. And so the way people learn nowadays is through those ability to do bite-sized education as fast as they can do it right in their hand. And so that's a neat way to say, how do we skill up and scale up our workforce to be able to engage in these fashion capabilities as well. So I like this slide here. This is that wave is coming, that disruptive wave is coming. So we get to learn how to surf so we can ride that wave together, and I think we can do this. So lastly, just want to thank you for having me here and some contact info, and I'll be available for questions. Thank you so much.
So hello, everyone. Really excited for a great conversation here. So Nate Ashton, Director of Accelerator Programs at Decode. We run an AI accelerator every single year because we see the impact that AI technologies can have on government across the board, right? Tons of different use cases, whether that's logistics or citizen services or HR, procurement, whatever it may be. So excited to hear from several different agency leaders on what you're working on, what AI means for you, and all of that. So let's jump right in if we want to start with introductions down the line, who you are, where you work, how you look at emerging technology, how that engages with your current role today.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Harrison Smith. I'm the Deputy Chief Procurement Officer at a place called Internal Revenue Service. Usually if it's around April, I make jokes about how you know who we are. No, but in all seriousness, within the areas that within procurement, we function quite often in the third and fourth quarter of the fiscal year. So more and more of our work shifts to the third and fourth quarter, to the extent that the amount of work that we have processed in September has doubled over the past 5 years. That, when combined with a loss of 40% of staff, I'm all for doing more with less, but that's doing everything with nothing at some point is a logical extension of that. So it's not really a good idea. And I think when we get into conversations about automation or frankly just being more intelligent about what we're doing, the concept that continues to ring true for the folks that I work for is shifting from low value work to high value work. Having a contracting officer who is literally the only person who is authorized to obligate funds on behalf of the federal government, having them sitting down and typing the same publicly available DUNS number into the same publicly available websites is something that needs to be done, but is not necessarily something that they need to be sitting there hand jamming away at. So really helping understand where those choke points are, and understanding how we can apply technology, automation and otherwise, to improving the process and to improving the customer experience is something that we're working very hard at.
Hi, I'm Nathan Naik. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Census Bureau. So I don't know, many of you may be aware, just like the IRS, we are getting ready for the 2020 census. But aside from the 2020 census, which we call the decennial census, we do about ballpark 120 surveys throughout the decade, the years, and we have lots of data. So we consider ourselves the people who provide data about the people, place, and economy. Many of the economic indicators are produced by us, along with some of the other bureaus, part of Department of Commerce. This is part of what we have, and from an AI perspective, we have lots of data.
Jesse Rollins, Defense Logistics Agency. I'm a data scientist with our Analytics Center of Excellence. We're really in the beginning stages of implementing AI and machine learning across the enterprise, so I do a lot of the technical oversight and strategic lead work. You can imagine how much impact this could have in our logistics nature, especially for delivering products to the warfighter on time.
Hi, I'm Alex Measure. I'm at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I'm an economist there. We do actually a lot of the statistics information similar to Census, and one of the ways that we're now using AI and specifically machine learning is to help us automate the processing and classification of large amounts of text information which we collect through our various programs. Maybe the best example of this is our injuries and illness program, which each year collects hundreds of thousands of written descriptions of work-related injury and illness. We used to have to manually read through each one of those descriptions and categorize them by hand, but this year we did about 80% of that automatically using deep neural networks. So we now have a wide variety of programs exploring these these applications of machine learning to data processing, and there's a lot of exciting work happening there at the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Hello, I'm Greg Allen at the Joint AI Center within the Department of Defense. We are a new organization that was stood up in the department officially last year, but we started getting money and people around January of this year. We are, according to the Department of Defense AI strategy, the focal point of the Department of Defense AI strategy, which means we have an awful lot of responsibilities that are DoD-wide related to sort of data governance and other issues in the department. And then we also are running projects internally in order to sort of develop and field AI capabilities. A few of those projects that are further along relate to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, predictive maintenance, which obviously supports logistics types activities, and then also cybersecurity. These are all areas where we feel that there are near-term applications of AI with mature commercial technologies where we can actually drive mission impact. And that really is our focus on sort of more near-term, more mature technologies. There are other parts of the Department of Defense that do great work thinking about the longer-term efforts, such as DARPA, such as the military service labs. But my organization, the Joint AI Center, is focused a little bit more on the near-term, mature-type technologies. One last major effort that we have is building up an AI infrastructure group. This is pretty common in commercial industry, as I'm sure most of you know. Almost all of the major tech companies that do have significant machine learning or data science programs or AI programs also have sort of a separate infrastructure group that manages those types of activities. We definitely see the wisdom in that and are trying to establish an AI infrastructure group not only for our own activities and our own programs, but also to make that available to the broader DoD. With the idea of generating positive momentum in our AI efforts across the department.
And so I've seen a lot of high-level discussion about the importance of investing in AI, bringing AI into government, whether it's the executive order in February or NIST coming out now with a roadmap for how to create standards around AI. Can each of you talk a little bit about how your agencies are strategically approaching the future of AI implementation at your agency? Head down the line?
Yeah, sure. I think similar to the work that's been done with Jake is that we like to think of it in different tiers, right? So you've got sort of the near-term, immediate efforts which can show shifting from low-value work to high-value work. So things that will actually impact users, in the next 30, 60, 90, 120 days, right? There's sort of immediate impacts that can be turned on pretty quickly. And some articles I've read, the estimate is you want to make sure that you're saving at least 2,000 hours of work for each automation that you're pursuing. We might think that's a little bit low, but if you can get an ROI that's decent in fairly short order, and it can use the term momentum, it can feed that momentum going forward, we think that's really important. You've got the sort of the second tier that we like to think about, which is, I'm a basketball fan, so I think of it as the mid-range game, the lost art of the mid-range jumper. But the areas that you're trying to make sure are slightly more complicated. So for the IRS, you can move from publicly available data to data that's more closely regarded to as tax status or tax databases more more sensitive areas, because you need to be very intentional about how you do that, make sure that the cybersecurity and the privacy laws are all adhered to. And then you've got the third tier, which is really, I want to have an enterprise application to have this type of approach for this agency. And one of the things, and I'm curious what my illustrious compatriots here have to say about it, but I've seen at least once agencies or organizations go straight to, well, I'm going to adopt XYZ application or XYZ approach because it's in the magic quadrant, or because I did some market research, and we're going to have, that's the only approach we're going to have. And I start to claw my eyes out because I said, I want to be clear here. So you don't have a car yet, but you're absolutely positive that you want a Porsche 4x4, with fuel injection engines and XYZ to travel on a road that you don't have yet. Why do you think you're there at a precise place where AI, machine learning, RPA, deep neural networks, whatever you want to call it, we're continuing to expand on this? So from my perspective, if you work to go standardize on a particular application or technology that you don't know how it works within your team, right, because that's the point. If you're not sure how it works within your team, within your architecture, my belief is that you're headed in the wrong direction. Having that momentum, getting the near-term wins, and having it feed on the lessons that you're going to learn and how you're going to approach, the mid-tier areas, as well as finally getting there to the long term, I think is really the way to go from a strategy standpoint.
So there are multiple contexts that we are pursuing at Census from an AI perspective. There is one context which is, okay, how do you roll AI out into the enterprise? So we basically are concentrating on 3 areas. The first area is the technology platform, to make sure that the technologies have the capability of supporting AI. You have the second part, which is the business processes, to make sure that the business processes aligned are suitable with AI, because as Harrison said and some of the others, and even the previous presenters, you go from manual process to now this capability of creating models and things like that. And then you have a third part, which is the workforce. You have to make sure that you have the workforce ready to support those AI and those tools capabilities. So we at the Census are trying to address all 3 components. Then you have the next aspect, which is part of the strategy, is where are you going to apply AI? There is application of AI on the IT side, and there's application on AI on the business side. It has very different meanings. There are things like cybersecurity. There are things like operations. There are things like application development for HR and other functions. That's purely on the IT side. But then when you have the business side, and by the way, this is my 3rd agency, each agency has a different focus on business. And every one of those agencies, by the way, a big issue is public trust. The federal government operates on public trust. Yes, there's return on investment, but if we cannot maintain public trust, there's no chance. And that's one of the biggest things we worry about. It's disclosure of public information, or PII. There are laws, okay? Census has law, IRS has law.
At least one.
We talked about, and by the way, Harrison talks about just one. We at the Census, we have all the laws because we have all types of data. We have our own data, we have IRS's data. We have to always protect it, and we have to maintain the public trust. We also have healthcare data. So there are so many laws that we have to adhere to. So when we do these AI tools and these capabilities, we have to make sure that we are always protecting that, because that helps with the public trust, because then we can continue to get the data we want. So from an AI perspective, we are putting it in the context. It all depends on what is the context of the conversation we are having, whether it is with procurement, whether it's with management, or whether it is with the internal people.
I would follow the same kind of lines you guys are saying. As kind of the lead data scientist for AI at DLA, people get kind of thrown aback when I come in and say, I don't really care about the problems. I care about the process of how we get the problems through the pipeline. So people want to talk about algorithms. They want to talk about what neural net we're going to use, where we're going to deploy it. What I really care about is I care about 2 main enablers, and that's data, right? Can I get to it? Where is it? How clean is it? Can I get other people's data? How quickly can I get new data requirements fulfilled? And probably the other big one for me is governance, right? So we're introducing kind of a scientific methodology to a lot of agencies that aren't scientific in nature, right? You're going to come in, you're going to do this iterative process of learning, discovering, hypothesizing, and then doing it over and over and over again. And you're going to build on each failed or successful experiment. And so, do we have the governance structure in place to capitalize on that? A lot of what you see now is like grassroots projects, quick wins. Where's the documentation behind those models? Because I'm going to use that in the next step. And without that proper governance in place, we're never going to get off of first base. If I don't have all that learning and all those lessons learned and all those failed projects to build on, I can't move forward in the future. And of course, protecting the public, there's laws. There's also ethical concerns. Every AI model is going to have an ethical concern because you're impacting a human being. They all look innocuous at first, but guess what? They're built on data, and that data is always biased. And if you don't have those checks in place, you can get in a lot of trouble. So I think strategically, it's not about the problems for me or the business decisions or the shiny objects. It's about, can we build an ecosystem to take a business problem, move it all the way through, learn, stack on top of it, and move again and again and again to get to a real capability for the agency.
So I'd say one of the ways that we approach AI at the Bureau of Labor Statistics is actually to start with some need, some problem that we need to address. It's not something that we just sort of have to sprinkle on everything that we do. We start with a problem. We look at the various solutions that are available. And the next thing we look at for determining whether to use AI is if we have the data. Probably the most powerful technique of AI is supervised machine learning, in which a computer essentially learns from data how to perform some task. If you don't have that data, it's going to be very hard to apply those machine learning techniques to your task. And so I think if you get those first two things right, a lot of the other stuff is much easier to deal with.
Great, so I would echo the sentiments of a lot of my colleagues, just to build off of what we just heard. The reason why we're so concerned about data is because machine learning is sort of a different style of programming. In traditional programming, every line of code is typed out by someone's human hands, ultimately. With machine learning, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but to a sense, the algorithm is being applied to a data set, and that is the source of the programming code. The machine is essentially programming itself based on exposure to data. The reason why that's interesting is because there's a lot of things that used to be impossible when programmed by human hands, and suddenly they're easy or possible, whereas they used to be hard or impossible. This is all quite interesting, but it does require that you have not just a lot of data, but a lot of the right kind of data. If I want to develop a computer vision algorithm that analyzes drone imagery automatically, airborne sensor video imagery, then census data is not going to help me. Right? No matter how much of it I have. So what matters is that I have a sufficient quantity of the right type of data of sufficient quality. And so our process for determining what types of projects to pursue is to identify, where can we find useful data sets where machine learning might be plausibly used, then what are the mission impacts that we could possibly have in order to do that, and then do we have somebody in the Department of Defense who would give us access to end users. I think our vision of modern software development is that if you don't get feedback from users, if you're not doing user testing, your odds of delivering something that's actually going to be of value go way, way down. And so that sort of three-part checklist is part of our vetting process to determine what types of projects might be attractive. As I think it was described a bit earlier, one of the goals of the JAIC is to sort of identify low-hanging fruit for AI in the department and then go pick it.
If I can pivot off one thing that I think several the gentlemen mentioned was that there's a shift of understanding where the emphasis is, right? Making sure that you have the right kind of data, making sure that you understand, hey, this may be a broken, sort of rote, mechanical, repetitive process, but if I don't have time to give the experts, the people who are doing it right now, if I don't give them the time to take a step back and say, you know what, how would I do this if I had these new tools where things were impossible before? If I don't give them time to do that, they're never going to be able to improve the situation. And you've got this shift of what the expert is, right? I don't consider myself the expert on what processes should be automated within even the IRS's Office of the Chief Procurement Officer. You've got to ask the people who actually do it on a day-to-day basis. And it's really interesting when you go down and you have a conversation with an individual, or you sit in a staff meeting and say, what is the task that you do most frequently that you think adds the least amount of value? And there's just stunned silence, for a little bit, but then the hands start popping up. They'll say, well, I wish you didn't have to do this, or why doesn't this system talk to that system? Well, tell me about that. How often do you do that? And you start finding out pretty quickly, well, we do that 4,500 times a year. Oh, okay. Or, hey, there are 55 data fields for 12,000 transactions. Well, I can't do the math that well, but that's a lot of data fields and a lot of transactions, right? So when you start taking a step back and looking at, hey, where's the end user? What do they need help with? And ultimately, are they actually going to use the solution, quote unquote, that you've tried to get them to? And if you don't have that iterative process, you will fail, because no one's going to want to use the bright, shiny object that you have, regardless of how many cool terms you throw at it.
Yeah, I think, Jesse, you were talking about the same thing, right, at DLA, where you had to start small, work with the end user. Can you talk a little bit about how you built that out?
Yeah. So we're in the infancy stage. So a lot of these things popped up, with innovative people in their own offices. They're like, here's the problem I have. I've heard about this AI thing. Maybe we can apply it and solve it, which is a great way to start. And you're exactly right. It has to start with a business problem. And so as the data scientist, I can't come in and tell you where to apply AI. I have no idea. Do you want me to spend time learning how to apply these methods, or do you want me to spend time learning your business? And with the turnover of your data scientists, they're not going to learn your business. It's going to take them a decade, and you're not going to be around for 3, 4, 5 years maybe. So it all has to start with engaging the business user, having that governance in place to say, okay, we've canvassed all the management, we've canvassed users. Here's some things, here's some problems that they're having difficulty with that are highly repeatable, there's a lot of data on. Let's categorize them. Let's see what we can actually solve. Let's pick out the low-hanging fruit. But you have to have that structure in place, or you're just randomly picking problems all over your agency, and it might not be the best money spent.
That's a great point, and I'd love to build off it. I described one of our major tasks as identifying low-hanging fruit and picking it. The other major task that we have is identifying parts of the Department of Defense that don't have low-hanging fruit but ought to. So for instance, in a maintenance activity, there's an awful lot of the Department of Defense that is still storing its maintenance records handwritten on paper. Right? And there's also a lot of sensors attached to defense vehicles or other systems, and they produce a lot of data, but the amount of storage available to them is such that they have to wipe the data after a certain number of days. So you actually don't have 10 years of historical data, you might only have 10 weeks of historical data, which is really unfortunate. So if we want to have sort of the opportunity for a much more broad-based exploitation of AI across the Department of Defense, over the long term, the sort of two things that we have to do is not only just identify the attractive low-hanging fruit, but also ensure that we're planting a lot of seeds for fruit in the future in the department, and that does get back to data governance.
And I think Greg brings up a very important issue, which is a lot of agencies are sort of generating the data that could be used for AI systems as part of their existing manual processes, but they're just not saving it in a way that will allow future people to build those AI systems. And I think that's the AI stuff that we've been able to do at the Bureau of Labor Statistics has all been possible because someone before us has thought carefully about how to store and record this data. And so I think that's a critical piece of the infrastructure in implementing AI is to make sure you have good processes for saving and recording and cleaning that data.
So if I may just jump in here. So at the Census, we've been embarking on something called the data lake. And what our goal is to try to get all the data. So there is all sorts of data. Harrison talked about data. Everyone's talking. There's different types of data. You've got structured data. You've got semi-structured data. You've got now data coming from sensors. You've got autonomous things happening. Data is coming from all over the place. Okay? We have to now figure out how to manage it. And that's where cloud technology, the Hadoop technology, and the newer technologies which are coming out in the open source world help us manage that so that we can have the data available for the AI models to be able to learn, to do supervised machine learning. So our goal is to, again, as I said, bring up a technology platform, then go address the business processes. So the technology side, we're going on the data lake. On the business side, I mentioned about public trust. We are heavily invested in something called, some of you may be aware, NIST has put out some new recommendations, but the Census Bureau is sort of leading in this field, is differential privacy. So just like machine learning is helping us, well, guess what? Machine learning is helping the other side also by able to linking records. So there is the notion of how can we do disclosure avoidance of PII using differential privacy algorithms and apply that to the data that we are exposing. Census plans to expose a lot of data to the AI models, to the people who want to use AI. This will be public data which will go through a protection process so that no PII is exposed, but the data is needed for these models to operate. And then we are going to it's great. We had a lot of survey statisticians. Now we are calling the whole field data scientists. Okay? They were the same people who used to create these algorithms, these models, and they used to program it in SAS and other standard tools. Now we are asking them, hey, program them in the newer platforms which have more capability, like R, Python, Spark. Okay? That's a transformation. That's a workforce transformation. They have to now take the algorithms that were talked about and put it in newer platforms so that we can take advantage of that. So that's a lot of work for an enterprise. Yes, we can take small, low-hanging fruit, but it's a fundamental change in the mindset of the organization to be able to adopt those capabilities.
So I think I've heard everyone mention low-hanging fruit and quick wins at this point. So I'd love to hear from each of you. What are the low-hanging fruit that you see? What are the problem sets within your agency that you see quick wins coming out of, and what outcomes could you expect from using AI with those problems?
For us in the procurement field, at the very least, and that's where we're focusing on right now, it's the repetitive rules-based efforts for which there's a lot of historical data. So we definitely have repetitive, right? We process about 12,000 transactions a year at the IRS alone. We most certainly have rules-based. There's more than just one rule on that, that's for sure. But it's also it's having those consistent processes that we really look at. And I think one of the areas that one of the areas that we're really focusing on is how do you find out whether or not it's actual low-hanging fruit that you can get to and eat and utilize? And if it's not, turn it off and go somewhere else. I think most of the folks have commented at some point about the importance of the human aspect of this. Stephen Blank has a concept called organizational debt, which is if you've got a bunch of folks who are really interested in running around breaking things and learning how to do things differently, and you have the other quote-unquote rules-based portion, who's like, well, where's my org chart? Where's my template? How's my data going to look? Where's my governance? And you let one side get out of whack relative to the other, you're never going to be successful. So what we're really focusing on doing at the IRS and in the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer is how do I test this emerging tech, this automation solution quickly, and then if it doesn't work, turn my attention to somewhere else. Because again, we have this feeder cycle that we're really working on. And ultimately we had implemented 3 at this point within the procurement processes. And now we're going after the Federal Procurement Data System, which is where we house all of our obligation data. Similar to Census, which obviously has a lot of source data, there are a lot of firms, people, individuals in the room who use services and use information that actually come out of usaspending.gov, Deltec, whatever it is. And that data is really important to a lot of people. And so focusing on making sure that it's clean, focused on making sure that it's accurate, and ensuring that I'm not asking a contracting officer to go back and enter in information that he or she doesn't absolutely need to because it exists somewhere else, and have them pay attention somewhere else and add value to the customer. Those are the areas that we're really looking at to begin with. Again, small areas that we can pivot off of, and areas that will really make a difference in rules-based, repetitive processes.
I mentioned the disclosure avoidance. One of the other areas we are looking at, we collect a lot of business data, and we are looking at how can we get more accurate NAICS codes. So the economic data is based on what businesses, what products you're running, and it's very different nowadays with mergers, acquisitions taking place. It's difficult to say, okay, what is this business actually selling or using or whatever it is. And so we are trying to use AI and machine learning to help us better associate NAICS codes with these records so that we can put out better products or more accurate products out there for the industry. Again, as I mentioned before, our data is used all over the place. It's used by the businesses to make decisions on where they're going to invest or what they're going to invest in, and we want to increase the accuracy of our data sets.
That term low-hanging fruit is a pain in my side sometimes. From the RPA side, it can be a little bit easier to identify those things like highly repetitive tasks that we can track in the system, and we can automate those a little easier. From the AI side, it gets a little more deceptive, right? Because you can see something that looks like low-hanging fruit, and as soon as you dive in, it's an unsolvable problem, right? Because most of these things are going to be failures, right? And if they were really low-hanging fruit, we would have solved them a decade ago. We're trying to use really complicated methods and a lot more data to solve really complicated problems. When I hear the term low-hanging fruit, I really think of problems that are generated by small business offices, right? I've got an office of 100 people doing something, and a small AI model would radically change how their business operates. It's hard from an enterprise level down to get to those pieces of low-hanging fruit without educating your workforce first. So I think a big thing that we have to do at DLA is really train our management and our decision makers to identify that low-hanging fruit for the data science team. Because we have a lot of issues identified right now, but they're still, when you dive into them, they are so huge and so complex. And we're never going to get to that low-hanging fruit without first educating the entire workforce on what the capabilities are so they can recognize them for us.
I like that point about low-hanging fruit. Sometimes low-hanging fruit looks like it's low-hanging, and then you can't quite get to it.
It tastes real bad.
It's really hard to get to. I would say a lot of the sort of obvious applications of machine learning at the Bureau of Labor Statistics are very similar to the applications at Census. We do a lot of coding. We collect a lot of text information about people's occupations, establishments, industries, how people are being injured, what products people are buying. And in order to sort of aggregate that information into estimates that we publish to the public, someone has to go through and categorize those things. So we've had a lot of success using machine learning to help us do that with work-related injury and illness information. This summer we've had a whole bunch of projects working on applying these same ideas to many other areas, classifying products, classifying occupations, classifying occupational requirements. So there's a ton of stuff that at least looks like it's low-hanging, and we'll see whether it turns out to be.
I think one of the differences between my own organization, the Joint AI Center, and the other folks on this panel is that we have a lot of sensor data in the Department of Defense. So whereas these folks are mostly interested in stuff that 50 years ago would have been exclusively paper records, but today can be digitized and you can play around with it in a digitized environment, we also have stuff that 50 years ago was captured on celluloid film. And now is digital video data, is digital infrared data, sonar data. A lot of these areas are attractive environments for machine learning algorithms. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we're doing in our Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Initiative. In this case, we're going to be flying an airborne sensor over in one of our projects. There's multiple projects covering a bunch of different areas. But in one of our projects, we're going to be flying airborne sensors over wildfires in California. And then we're going to be collecting full motion video data of that activity. And then we're going to be automatically using a computer vision algorithm detecting which frames of the video have active wildfire. And if you've ever experienced wildfires or heard about them, you know they move quite fast over the course of several days. And keeping track of where they are and where they're headed is a real challenge for first responders in disaster situations. And the sort of typical standards for FEMA and other disaster relief organizations is to try and get out maps distributed to all of these organizations once per day. We believe that we'll be able to cut that to about once per hour and distribute it over the sort of mobile app that is commonly used by the National Guard and other organizations. So by switching to this airborne sensor, applying an AI computer vision algorithm, and then converting that into geolocation data that is usable through a map application that we are also developing, we're really able to make an impact to our users in a short time frame. We expect to be testing in the field with the National Guard in a matter of months. And my organization had basically no money in January and no people in January. So I realize, if we were Google and Facebook, testing with operational users and making mission impact in 8 months, sounds like an eternity. But in the Department of Defense, that's light speed. And we're really excited about this upcoming testing environment that we have. And that's one of the areas where we can make an impact. The reason why we think this is interesting is that these types of sensor data environments where we're collecting an extraordinary amount of data often tend to have a human bottleneck. In the case of airborne video imagery analysis, this is something where we've been hiring at an incredible pace to try and keep up with the volume of video imagery data that we're collecting. But the pace at which our data gathering is increasing and the pace at which we could realistically hire people and afford salaries to do that kind of work, there's just no comparison. If we did not have access to this sort of automation path, we would never keep up with the data deluge that we're dealing with. So there are environments in the Department of Defense that do look like this, and they really are low-hanging fruit for AI applications. Assuming, that you have access to the right kind of data, you have access to a user community who is willing to let you prototype and test, and assuming that there are mature machine learning algorithms that are relevant to the data set that you want to play around with. So we're excited, and we hunt for those opportunities all the time.
So to pick up on what Greg is saying, these things are important even in our realm. So from the census standpoint, one of the key things for us is things like, addresses, vacant housing, new divisions being built. By the way, how many of you know this hotel was not here a year ago? This was a parking lot.
An expensive one.
An expensive one. Well, guess what? For us, as we said, we keep track of addresses. We keep track of businesses. For us, this is a new establishment. So we get these images. So to Greg's point, we are taking images. We are working with companies. Companies are also building their own AI. Esri is part of a tool that is used for mapping. We take that information, we take additional information from counties, from states, from federal government, and we put it together. And we say, okay, now there's an establishment here. That means that we have to be able to get data about that establishment. So a lot of these technologies are going to start coming together and feeding more data. And the question then is, okay, how do you match that data up? And human beings will not have enough time to match it. And that's where technologies like AI and machine learning will hopefully help us do it faster so that we can produce faster data for the others to use.
I just want to echo a point that was made quite a bit earlier, but in general, this automation allows people to go to higher value tasks. In our case, it is not the case that we are, getting rid of all these video analysts. It's that instead of staring at, vast swaths of empty video images, the computer can say, these are the images that are actually worth looking at. And so they can devote their time better to the more high value added efforts. And that's true in video imagery analysis, but in general, that's true for just about all of our AI efforts.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have a joke in the office. It's not a Terminator, it's a toaster oven. Right? It just takes a task that you ask it to do and does it for you, as opposed to holding it with a spatula over a flame, right? I think something else you've heard consistently is the ability to pivot and the ability to test. And I think one of the areas that we're really focusing on at the IRS is how do we create an acquisition and procurement approach that doesn't require you to, one, know exactly what you want for a whole bunch of data that you don't currently use, or I have a bunch of data, and here are my guiding principles, and these are the problems that I'm having. Industry, why don't you figure it out? You tell me where the problems are. So the IRS just posted, I think 5-10 days ago, a draft solicitation to pursue automation solutions to help with the federal procurement data system, the contract obligation data that I was talking about. And there were really 2 or 3 main areas that we worked on. One, it doesn't pose a solution. It doesn't say, I want you to do this. I want you to take this set of actions, a series of 200 thou shalt statements. It says, here are my problems, and here are my goals. I want you to improve the data, and I want you to limit manual rework. And that was it. The other point that was important is that it was 6 pages long. The solicitation, the government solicitation, was 6 pages long, and that's because there was a 3-page intro. And so the conversation about the people and the partners that you work with and where the data comes from so that folks can understand where it is, there's a fundamental shift in adopting this type of approach and this type of agile technology that's usually used in the R&D arena. Right? Folks are used to other transactions authorities. Folks are used to having cyber research projects that don't go past the first phase. We in the government don't always have that same mindset of, hey, I have a portfolio of 5 things. I'm only going to fund those initially for 6 months, 6 weeks, whatever it is. Let me pivot to the ones that work, and then let me have them prototyped, and then the next step is to test it with the user. And I don't want to do that in 8 years. I want to do that in 8 weeks. And so that concept in a technology space, in a services space, in a solution space, is not that robust yet. And so it requires a conversation about risk. It requires a conversation with your acquisition and procurement partners. Because if we're going to dream up, hey, I want you to draw me up an AI strategy for all the data that I have and that I will continue to have, you'll do nothing at plan for the next 30 years and then start over again for 30 years. And we'll never get to anything approach even a mildly good-tasting, low-hanging fruit, right? So that's the balance, and those are the areas that we're really working at within the IRS, is how do we do this quickly, and how do we identify the ones that work and the ones that don't work, and move ahead and learn from that and improve going forward.
So I'll try to leave a couple minutes for questions here at the end, but would love to close out with each of you. What are you most excited about looking forward in terms of the potential for AI to really disrupt things?
I personally am most excited about having the people that I work for be able to focus on things that add more value to their customers. One of the things that we've done in the IRS is we actually issued a survey to every single one of our active industry partners that has a contract with us. I don't know many folks who do that. We issue customer service surveys to the folks that we support in the CIO, to other entities and bureaus that we support. And we're trying to get to where is our value proposition, right? Where is our value proposition at the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, and how we support the taxpayer, and how we support the CIO, and how we engage with our industry partners. For being in an office that buys stuff, we're in sales quite a bit. Right? We have to sell the concept of, hey, the IRS is willing to engage in these types of emerging technologies. You should come contract with the government, even though you may not think it's a good partner to have, because we do think it is. We have data scientists, contracting officers, and contracting specialists are in high demand. Want to have them make sure that they are able to do valuable work that supports the customer and is frankly rewarding. There's a lot of work for them to do, so we're not trying to get rid of the team. We're trying to have them focused on things that are more valuable to themselves and more productive and more valuable to the customer.
In our case at the Census, depending on which portfolio, I mentioned the IT or the business, our whole idea is to improve efficiency and improve the quality of data available for decision making. That's the fundamental thing. Whether it's to the outside world or internal, we just want to make sure we have better data.
I think for me, on the technical side, it's radically changing, managers and employees' lives. Like, when you deploy a successful model, and someone comes up to you and says, "We've been doing this for 40 years this way, and now you've multiplied our output by 40 to 100 times." Like that's a good feeling. Yeah. and the giant enterprise models are great, but radically changing small offices throughout an agency is really exciting for me. And I think that's where a lot of the disruption is going to come from. Not the giant ones, but small changes throughout an organization that kind of stack up to a giant cultural change.
But I'm sorry, but the government is so good at large-scale, long-term IT projects. We're awesome at those, right?
You'll have to give me that playbook.
It'll be a short one.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I'm looking forward to these techniques helping us automate a lot of routine, maybe not super enjoyable tasks that are a critical part of government, and not only automating those tasks, but allowing us to do those better. I think looking forward, some of the technologies that are really interesting to me are, there's been a lot of developments in this sort of field of transfer learning, which is basically techniques for allowing you to train models when you don't have a lot of training data. That's going to open up the range of tasks that we can apply these techniques to. And the other thing that I'm really interested in is something Nathan mentioned, which is the differential privacy. It's a set of tools for allowing you to sort of use information while still protecting the privacy of the individuals that contributed that information. That's really critical to government and also to almost everyone. Because data is the key ingredient into these machine learning systems, and a lot of that data is private and should remain private. And these tools are giving us good ways of sort of maintaining both of those, usability and privacy.
So my organization exists to generate mission impact for the DoD components and the armed services. So what I'm absolutely most excited about over the next year is that a lot of our minimum viable products are going to be in the hands of end users in the DoD, which is really exciting. And as I said before, our approach is very much to take a minimum viable product theory of the case, which states that this is not going to be everything you need or everything you want, but please try it out. See how it works, tell us how we can make it better. That iterative development loop with user feedback we think is critical to all modern software development, and it's absolutely critical to AI software development. And that user testing, you're going to be hearing more about it just in a matter of months. There's some really exciting news coming out from us.
Great. Well, huge thank you to all of you. Do we have time for a couple of questions? No, it looks like we're getting cut off. All right, well, we'll have to find a different crowd. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much to that wonderful panel. We're going to take just a few seconds here to clear the stage and get set up for the next panel. So let me just tell you a little bit about who you can expect in the next conversation. I'm pleased to introduce the next session, a fireside chat presented by Pluralsight. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Nick Sinai, who is the Senior Advisor at Insight Partners and former U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer in the Obama administration. And he's going to be in conversation with James Hansen, who is Government Executive Media Group's Vice President, and he's also the publisher of NextGov. So I think we're good, ready to go here. I'm just going to turn it over to James.
That's a hard group to follow right there.
It is.
There's a lot of smarts on this stage. Nick, thank you for joining us. Why don't you just kick things off with, tell us a little bit more about Insight and your role and really your experience with emerging technologies.
Sure thing. Great to be here. Great to see a lot of familiar faces. So Insight is a large venture capital and growth investor firm. All we invest in is software. And those are companies that have found product market fit, that are winning in the marketplace, usually winning with tier one commercial customers, and starting to scale. And so that's when Insight comes and invests $20, $50, $100 million and really helps them go global, helps them come into the public sector, a number of, helps add additional capabilities. The thing that I want to stress is that we're really investing in companies that are enterprise grade and are appropriate for the complexities of the federal mission. I did earlier stage venture capital earlier in my career before public service. And so I love two guys and a dog. It's such a cool thing. It's not always right for the kinds of applications and use cases in federal government, especially in IT. Mm-hmm. On the R&D side, it's absolutely appropriate. And we commercialize a lot of great tech coming out of the federal labs. But for the enterprise use cases, What we really want are venture-backed companies that are growing fast, that are continuing to innovate on the product side. And in fact, 2 of the 4 sponsors here are inside-backed companies, so Pluralsight and Hootsuite, 2 fantastic companies. And it's these kinds of companies that continue to innovate month after month, year after year, and that's really what we need in the public sector.
So we've heard a lot today about how emerging technologies can really change the way government operates, deliver services to its citizens, supports veterans, and just help advance the mission. With that, there are obviously, we've heard today, there are challenges, and there's a lot of planning that goes into that, and nuances from data to security to legal, which we just heard about, and some of the laws around data. Can you tell us, where to start? Like, where's a great place to start? We've heard, obviously, the last panel, there was a lot of data is essentially the starting point, really, for a lot of AI applications, but just emerging technologies in general, and disruptive technologies.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of starting with the end user, starting what problem you're trying to solve, and I think that's oftentimes the hardest, because we can get, and I think the previous panel did a really nice job of talking about how that's in their domains in AI, that's how they're thinking about the problem set as well, because we can jump right into a bunch of sexy technology terms. And take something like robotic process automation. Robots, right? Sounds really cool. What are you really doing? You're scripting 2 legacy technologies. Now that's super important and valuable, right? Because you are freeing up federal workers to do higher value work. So I think RPA is totally appropriate, relevant. We have a couple companies that we've made investments in. So RPA totally works. But if we start with robots and that kind of thing, that's not the way. Let's start with what problems are we trying to solve for the veteran, for the warfighter, for the student, for those in need, whatever, and then work backwards. And so any agency has a good sense of mission. The trick is to kind of prioritize what is going to kind of move the needle with the most folks externally or internally, and then kind of break it down into how can you try things and then scale from there. And so I really liked what the past panel was talking about in terms of how do you prototype with end users, whether they're customers or citizens of an agency, or whether they're internal employees or operators inside the DoD.
Is there best practices for being able to start with that mission and then start with the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit and then scale up? Do you have examples of agencies or use cases that you've worked with that start there? I know the gentleman from, I think it was DLA, was saying, his example was start with an office of, 50 employees and then start learning best practices from there. Do you have some examples? Or?
Yeah, so there's a lot of examples. I'm a huge fan of the Defense Innovation Unit. This got started in the past administration, and this current administration has continued it. And it's a good example of a group set up to try and buy technology and help it scale. And so there's examples, the Air Force, for example, the CTO of the Air Force is in the front row, so I have to.
Hi, Frank.
So it's a good example of here's a unit that was designed to try and buy, and they have done that in close partnership with the CTO and finding technologies that can actually scale at an enterprise-wide. Funny enough, it's actually the group that incubated Kessel Run, which is a kind of flagship unit for developing applications quickly and deploying them out to the field. And so it's both an example of a unit that's designed to try and buy technology, as well as a group that innovated and actually founded other important units inside the Air Force.
And how do organizations keep pace with the advancement or acceleration of some of these emerging technologies? I mean, whether it's from, cloud started like 10 years ago, and now we're actually like smartly going to market and implementing cloud. Big data analytics is now, transforming to the next phase of machine learning, AI. How do agencies kind of keep pace with maybe the private sector or internal research and development with how fast these, and what's that impact on the people, the process and the governance models internally?
Yeah, so I think you have to start with the people, right? I mean, I think there's no substitute for getting smart folks inside of government. And the good news is we have a lot of really smart folks in government. And so how do we make sure that they are keeping current with the latest technical skills, right? So how do they, just in time, make sure that they are aware of the right technologies? And so how do we acquire them? How do we hire them? How do we train them and upskill them? Platforms like Pluralsight. And how do we make sure that they have an opportunity to be fulfilled in their careers? There's no substitute for great people in technical roles, not just as the CTOs, but also in acquisition. All right, and so I like what Tracy Walker has done with the U.S. Digital Service in training contracting officers about how to buy agile software development shops. And so we still custom build a lot of software in government, arguably too much. But if we're going to do that, let's make sure that we are using the best practices of user-centered design, let's have the best groups that can actually build software rather than the groups that can write the best PDF. And I think that's actually a super important point here, is that there's so much process involved in acquisition. I love what Harrison was saying about where the IRS is going, because we've classically run into this problem of we're going to write requirements for years, we're going to procure for years, we're going to build for years, and then we hit an operator or a user in year 10, and then even if we got all of that right, and like the chances that you got all of that right is very, very low. But then technology has moved on, yep. the user needs have moved on, all of that stuff has moved on, and so it's just a recipe for failure. And all the stats out there will tell you just about how big IT projects fail. And so how do we break it up into pieces? And that means how do we evaluate technology, and how do we decide, hey, we're going to use this technology versus that technology? Because the problem that we're solving may actually still be relevant. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we are writing user stories and either building or buying great software against those problem statements, right? But we have to find ways to look at that technology. And so it's not about who can write the best 90-page PDF that gets submitted to a contracting officer. Mm-hmm. It's about who can show you great technology, and where is that technology scaled in peer organizations. And so that's why having really technical people and people who have experience at scale inside agencies as feds matters, because you want to know not just what's happening in the Air Force, but you want to know what's happening in IRS and in Bank of America and in Facebook and all these other organizations, right? And so you can understand, has this technology worked at scale, and how similar is that environment to mine? And so, and that's one of the great things about venture capital is venture capital tends to back companies that are product companies that are trying to win at tier 1 commercial customers, as well as the great federal organizations here today.
Staying on that procurement kind of component there, how important is as emerging technology is changing, it's very hard to keep up with, and I've been in this space and I'm like an inch deep. But how important is it for the acquisition and procurement community to communicate and share information and meet and collaborate with like IT shop? Because it seems like IT has a difficult time keeping up with the change. How does the procurement acquisition side?
Yeah, so I love all my acquisition friends and folks that were on the panel, but I fundamentally think that we have to let the business and technical executives drive the decisions. And acquisition and procurement has to be a complement and a partner to them, because when mission executives, when business executives, and when technical executives, when they say, this is the problem that I'm facing and this is what I want to go do, then it's not the place of a contracting officer to say, well, this is sort of equivalent and it's 10% cheaper. Because software is living, breathing stuff. Great vendors will continue to improve software and their platforms, and so you want to make a bet on a particular platform or a category inside a platform, having done appropriate market diligence, seen the product demoed, talked to peers at similar organizations, public and private, right? And so having contracting and procurement say, well, this thing, says it's in the same category. No, you want to buy one of the market leaders or one of the market disruptors that really have not just the best tech today, but are going to continue to innovate in terms of that feature functionality, while not locking you in too, right? And that's the other thing that I know a lot of feds in the room worry about is, well, wait a second, I don't want to get locked in. And so that's why this conversation of open APIs, making sure that we have access to the data is super relevant.
One of the things that we hear, NextGov, we've been covering a lot on AI, and there's a lot of stories, and it is probably the most transformative technology that we've seen in a decade, century. And a lot of people are concerned that AI may take jobs away, while others think that AI will provide a lot of job opportunity, not just for developers and IT folks, but really to move, like we heard on the last panel, move people to higher value work and decision making. How do you identify, I know Harrison had the last panel had some suggestions, but how do you identify from a skill set and work performance, like what are those opportunities that we can automate and move more mission critical work out?
Yeah, so I think he's got a nice framework for it and some rules of thumb that work for him. I think at the end of the day, we want to identify processes that are paper-based, right? And rather than just taking those and digitizing those and saying, let's actually look, step back and see if we can think about a better process. And so Greg was talking about, from the Jake, was talking about, paper logs of maintenance. A lot of what government does is adjudication of case management, right? And so a lot of that is paper-based, and it's not just enough to digitize that and say, okay, now I have a digital case management. Let's actually think about how we can automate stuff, how we can better predict stuff, how we can say, hey, think about a lot of what government does is enforcement, especially in the regulatory agencies, which I don't see enough of here. But so how do you better predict who you want to actually go enforce? So yes, you can do random inspections, but you also want to have prediction about, hey, this is a entity or organization or a business that is likely to be an offender, and so our enforcement arm should be going out and doing. And I think every agency kind of has some sort of inspection kind of regime. So being able to predict things, I think, is super valuable.
And how do you, when you identify those opportunities, how do we kind of I know Dominic from Accenture talked a little bit about reskilling and upskilling. How do you do that? What are some best practices to take those people, now that you've automated 2,000 hours worth of man hours? How do you identify, okay, how do I train this people, and what are the skills that they need?
Yeah, so not to harp on the Air Force again, but they're setting up and Bill Marion, the deputy CIO, has talked publicly about Air Force Digital University and how do you bring on-demand training to airmen around the globe. Look at DHS, for example. They had a cloud stand-down day where they basically made cloud technology available, training using Pluralsight and others to make that available so that everyone could get smarter on the cloud. Look at what Kelly O'Connor is doing over at the VA around innovating on product management. And this is another shift. We have too many project managers in government, and we're trying to move to more product managers who are intensely focused on user needs and then building and buying the right emerging tech to service those needs. But she's developing a culture of product management and starting some courses there. So I think you see some pockets of excellence. The challenge is, how do we do this at scale? I know that Suzette Kent has been talking about the cyberskilling initiative and has this initial cohort, and that's really exciting and promising. But how do we do it for 2.1 million feds, right? And so I think you need the kind of on-demand platforms. I think you need things that are leveraging machine learning and AI so that they are tailored and customized to the learner. And not all of these are going to be IT. We tend to kind of collapse things to IT. But one of the things, if I look at the Insight portfolio, some of the companies that have been tremendously successful and now are public companies are about democratizing skills, right? So democratizing analytics and developing a whole culture of analytics. We're going to have a lot more data engineers than we're going to have data scientists. We're going to have a lot more information analysts and data analysts than we have data engineers, right? And so it's that pyramid. And we always say, oh, data scientists, yeah, we want more DJ Patels. That's great. But we can, and we are training more data scientists. I am a big fan of data scientists, but we can also think about how do we empower information analysts and data analysts with a culture of analytics. And that means they should be able to use the best tools, right? And so those are open source tools and commercial tools that they can easily try and buy. And so getting back to what the previous panel was talking about in terms of a culture of risk taking, right? Even Jose was talking about that early on. So I'm really bullish about the opportunity set if we can democratize among so the things don't become just a couple little experts, right? I think that's what's dangerous is if we're really going to do automation and AI at scale, we need to make sure that we are putting modern tools and platforms in the hands of a lot of federal workers, because they have a lot of great ideas and they're doing a lot of cool things. And so let's do this at scale.
Well, and I think there are now, the technology is, from a user experience, more people can do more things and learn more things. And so one of the things that NextGov's covered, was the OPM study and did some analysis on, the number of IT workforce over the age of 60 compared to under the age of 30, and the average is 5 to 1. Some agencies like VA are like 19 to 1, pulling it up a level in terms of like long-term workforce development, and as technology continues to emerge, how do you look within your organization to determine what are the skills? How do you evaluate the skills that you have and the workforce that you have, and identify people that, again, could be trained on in an IT environment or to use technology?
So some of the best and most talented feds I know are not spring chickens and are in that demographic that you're talking about. So I have the utmost respect for them, but we do have a demographic challenge, right? Of this almost 4.5 or 5 to 1, and there's a lot of energy and tech skills in the younger generations, and so we have to figure out ways, because we have retirement and a whole bunch of other challenges, of how do we attract them to federal service, right? So I am a proud advisor of Coding It Forward. So Coding It Forward was a group of a couple of my undergraduate students at Harvard actually came to me and said, hey, we want to create a federal internship. One of them had done their last summer at Uber Engineering, super bright, precocious students, and yet they looked on USA Jobs and all they could find was a SharePoint implementation. And with all apologies to Microsoft, that was not what was interesting to them. And so they wanted to do some interesting stuff, and Census was nice enough to actually pioneer Coding It Forward and pony it up for 13 data scientists and software developers. And so now Margaret Weicker just gave the keynote last week. 55 developers, data scientists, designers in 6 federal agencies. Now that's just 55, and some of them are getting hired and coming into federal service, but we have to think about how do we attract that at massive scale? How do we attract tech talent at massive scale? And I think that's totally doable. I mean, we have a great scale, we have great experiences, we have a really important mission. There's so many things that we can attract. We need to make sure that we show them that there's going to be professional development, that there's going to be modern tools and environments that they're going to learn from the really wise folks in the room here. So I think this is totally doable, but we have to be intentional about it, and so that means we can't have a 9-month hiring process, kind of a very kind of broken process in the way that we hire feds today.
So while we're fixing that process, how do we get the people currently in the federal workforce, maybe in that 30 to 60 range, how do we get them the skill set to understand cloud and work in a SaaS environment, or certainly security skills are in much need. What platforms are available, or what can we do to to get those people up to speed?
So I'm a huge fan of Pluralsight, which is an insight investment. So Pluralsight is a on-demand tech skills platform that helps you assess the tech skills of your workforce, and then also helps design the just-in-time courses for you. And the great thing about it is it's on demand. And I think that's to one of the earlier conversations was we're moving from classroom-based training to on-demand training. And as I talk to a lot of CIOs and CTOs and CISOs in this room and across the federal government, they say that their tech workforce has developed outside of the job specifications, right? And so, I mean, again, going back to the Kessel Run, you had some airmen who were trying to code. They didn't necessarily have the military occupational specialty of software developer, which I think had been retired and has now come back, thanks to the Air Force seeing how important software is, right? But you know, that's a tremendously important thing. And so we have to find ways to let feds continue to upskill themselves, because they will do it already. They go and do master's programs and SES training and technical training and continuing education. So part of it is we have to continue to let them to do that, but instead of saying, well, you're going to get continuing education credits from coming to this conference and listening to us blather on, like, let's actually let them get hands-on keyboard training or other kinds of skills training that's going to help them. But let's give them credit for what they are learning today, and let's also try and steer that. Like, let's be intentional about saying, hey, these are the kinds of cyber or data and AI skills that we're looking for, and so we're going to incent folks inside the workforce to develop those skills and reward those folks by giving them greater responsibility, greater compensation, recognition, all of those things.
Is there any questions from the audience? No, we don't have time for questions from the audience. Okay, I've been told. Well, Nick, thank you very much. I appreciate all your experience and insights on this topic, especially around the workforce and how we keep moving that forward. So appreciate your time. Round of applause for Nick, please. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Persons, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks to everyone, the diehards that are still here. So it's great to be able to do that.
Last panel standing in the way of you guys and your lunch, so we'll try and make it interesting.
Indeed. Right.
Yeah. So Dr. Persons, I know you've been chief scientist at GAO for almost over a decade now.
Yes.
But your second title, managing director of the Science, Technology, Assessment, and Analytics Office, is a little more new. Would you be able to talk a bit for people who might not be familiar with the work that STAA is doing, kind of what you guys are doing over there?
Sure. Thanks, Jack. So GAO has been in the business of science and tech for a number of decades. As you all know, it's primarily known as the oversight arm of the U.S. Congress, and we are an independent, nonpartisan, fact-based agency. I think over time we've evolved to become essentially one of the, if you think about your big four firm or a firm like Accenture or McKinsey or something, we're sort of that version for the federal government, but we are all nonpartisan, not politically appointed type of feds doing things. So over time, as the government has gotten involved in more science and technology, so too the questions that we need to be answering for the array of Hill clients that we serve. We serve, by the way, 100% of the standing committees of the House and the Senate, and then up to 80% on any given year of all the subcommittees. So it's a very broad remit to be able to do that. Science and tech, as you know, we're immersed in an era of convergence, right? Cloud, AI, data analytics, 5G, all of these sort of things, all of it coming all at one time, and the incredible powers or opportunities there, and yet still the risks that we have. What does that do to our privacy, let's say? What does it do to our health and human safety, et cetera? So in recognition of that, that's where STAA was formulated to help amplify and expand on the work. And so really the best way to think about our STAA is really the oversight, insight, and foresight. Again, back to that sort of Accenture or McKinsey, something like in the federal government. Function for the Congress. And in the oversight domain, of course, we do look at a lot of the science and technology related issues. Think about the agencies like the National Science Foundation, or we look at Manufacturing USA. Any of those innovation programs, we need to, patent law, et cetera. So that will continue to go on. But in the insight domain, we have a business that we've been doing for a while on engineering sciences. It's looking at, the government's big into large capital acquisition programs. It could be a nuclear submarine like the Columbia class, the new Navy boat that needs to take over the Ohio class submarine as part of our key nuclear triad. From that over to, let's say, a facility to manage a special nuclear material like uranium, the uranium processing facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee being constructed. So, but to look at that and say, well, what's the life cycle cost of that? What's the schedule risk analysis of that? What are the critical technology elements in that need to be managed and risk managed along the way for deployment? And then even in the software domain now, how do we develop software systems where we have, like my friend, the former chief scientist of the Air Force says, look, the JSF is really 20 million lines of code that can sort of pull 9G turns and things with hardware peripherals that fire missiles. So that's a big thing that we're doing, and that's really in the insight piece. Okay. The newest thing in STAA is the innovation lab that we have, and it's meant to explore advanced analytics, AI and machine learning that you've heard a lot of great things about this morning, and then other emerging technologies, Internet of Things, blockchain prototypes and things like that, because we have to prepare GAO and help Congress do its oversight on these particular technologies as they are disrupting things. And indeed, we're already getting those sort of questions. They're worried about, well, if this algorithm is sorting out, let's say, on a job applicant pool, is it sorting out just according to the idea of qualified versus not qualified, and not according to things that would violate the Civil Rights Act of 1964, for example. So that's something that we are going to have to do ourselves to help Congress do that. So again, that's insight. And then lastly, foresight is the technology assessment piece. That was a big piece on that. There used to be an agency in the Congress that lived between 72 and 95 called the Office of Technology Assessment. That mission went away, but we have been the owners, the stewards of that mission since 2002. So we are decades old in terms of doing that. And that's really just starting the conversation, not with a federal nexus department agency program project and asking to audit it in some evaluative manner and make recommendations. That's all very important, but as a baseline mission. But in addition, let's just say, well, with the advent of, let's say, 5G, like a big study we're doing now, what does that mean to society, the environment, the economy, the social system, et cetera, and to try and help Congress in a prospective way so that it's more proactive rather than reactive. And as technologies unfurl, we'll have help them with a framework and create policy options for them that are neutral. We're not going to make recommendations in this space, but it's important for us to say, look, you could do nothing, and here's a pro-con analysis. You could do A, and here's a pro-con analysis. You could do B, and we think that's where we're uniquely placed within Congress to do that. So that's the genesis of STAA, why we're excited, and there's a groundswell of lots of interest on that, not only in terms of the technology assessment mission that used to be done by a sister ledge branch agency, but also all the insight work we're doing, particularly in the innovation lab space.
So I know, STAA kind of brought together all of these different pieces of expertise kind of across GAO under one umbrella. And I know the goal, correct me if I'm wrong, the goal by the end of the year is to have 70 employees with STAA, and then double that in the years ahead, aspirationally.
That's right. It's an aspiration. Of course, we are, even though we're a special agency for the Congress, we go through the normal appropriation cycle, and so it is aspirational. The Comptroller General is wanting to, so by the merging and the hiring campaign that we are under now, and we're eking to the wire as we come to the end of fiscal year 19, we'll have aspirationally with 70 FTE. And then, as you say, Jack, it's a doubling over time again for that, and that's significant for GAO, and I think, again, given the commitment. But I assure you, there's no and will be no lack of work or challenges for this team to address across that oversight, insight, foresight space.
I'm sure.
And we're also designed to partner with, we have very talented staff across GAO and existing teams that have been managing issue areas ranging from healthcare to homeland security issues or defense or whatever to help them succeed. So that's where we are.
No, certainly. So the whole idea is to kind of build, tech literacy in Congress, and for everyone who watched the Facebook and Google hearings last year, that was the lack of tech literacy may have been put on full display. But at the same time, there's this gap between the tech industry, Silicon Valley, and the government. But lawmakers are soon they're going to be called on to be making some pretty big decisions about a lot of emerging technologies, 5G, AI, those kinds of things. From your perspective, why is it so important to kind of have you guys there as a third-party arbiter, and what could be the consequence of maybe getting it wrong?
Sure. I have a friend who's a former CTO of the FCC, and he's now at Carnegie Mellon. He does a lot of great stuff in engineering and public policy. But he says, I like his quip, he says, Congress is the most advised body in the world. Okay, not just the US, the world. Okay, everyone is telling Congress what to do. The key thing, if you're from the congressional perspective, you're trying to do a filtering and sort algorithm and saying what is true, what is valid, what doesn't have an angle, what's nonpartisan, etc. Give me the facts. I'm still going to make the decisions. I'm elected to be a partisan, by the way. That is the system, right? But it's our job to give that nonpartisan, fact-based, non-ideological to those duly elected officials as they're making their, and executing their constitutional responsibilities. So advising them how the quality, the independence, no hooks in it, no K Street sort of angle in that kind of thing. I think that's our unique space at GAO generally, and particularly in this area, as you're saying, is we're in this incredible disruption. What does AI do to the Privacy Act of 1974? Right? How do we think about that? How do we think about 5G and edge versus core type management and cyber security and privacy and civil liberties and all these sort of things? So we do have to do that. The consequences of getting it wrong is, do we want to have a system? I think like Eisenhower. Eisenhower said, it's, when the first shot's fired, we just celebrated a major anniversary on D-Day. Ike said, when the first shot's fired, the plans are worthless, but planning the process is essential. And so I think in the same way, we're not going to try and predict the future. We certainly have no Swami kind of powers to be able to do that. Nobody does. But we think to try and say these are the ways or the best information to help think and frame the issue in a nonpartisan, fact-based way. We believe we're the only ones that can do in all of that confluence of things in this space.
Gotcha. So I'm actually going to ask you to predict the future a little bit.
Okay.
Are there any particular areas of technology right now that you see us being like right on the cusp of making a lot of these big decisions?
Yes, I think when you really look at the most disruptive technologies in history, the history of technology, the most successful ones are the ones that ultimately disappear. Right, that sounds strange because you think, oh, they're such a big deal. At the time, I'm sure they are. But we take it for granted now, like if I pull out my smartphone, right, nobody thinks this is a big deal. Everybody has one. It's become a general purpose type of technology. It's assumed that it's there and our lives depend on it. I left mine, by the way, on one of the rideshare rides, and I was in a catch-22. I couldn't call the rideshare to get my phone back because it was in the... So it becomes this sort of lifeline type of thing. We assume that when we plug into the outlets in the wall, we're going to have that distributed electricity, right? We assume that we can walk in like there's Wi-Fi in this room that's free to us as long as you have the password, right? All of these things have profoundly changed our lives, and so that's where we need to be in that space to look at those things. So AI and blockchain and all these are having their moment. AI's actually had multiple hype cycles on things. I think it's going to have another one in terms of the expectation, particularly as folks think about it in the general AI context. That's a whole nother conversation. But I think those things are the ones that are, as they proliferate, they'll start to disappear. We'll start to take them for granted. That's the true success, right? The same thing with 3D printing. We now have it on the desk. But using it in certain ways and doing the creative things like the VA is doing, in the medical community is indeed powerful. So all of these are there, and all of them bear key questions that oftentimes aren't being thought of or asked in the hype of the moment. And so that's where we're trying to step into that gap.
Certainly. So one thing that I found particularly interesting when you guys launched STAA is kind of this this process you guys have for building your own expertise. So you obviously are hiring up, bringing in people across GAO, but then you guys are also partnering with different academic institutions, bringing in experts from outside the government for these kind of short-term stints, come in for a couple years, advise you guys, contribute to that mission, and then go back to their lives outside of the government.
Right.
And as agencies are kind of looking around, we've heard a lot about the need to build tech expertise across the government within specific agencies. What do you think? What's the idea behind kind of like having those rotational positions, and maybe do you think that's something that could be applied more broadly across government?
Right, and it's a great question. And when you look at and you think about and ask the question, what are some of the most innovative agencies in the federal government? Right, there's a lot of innovation, like you mentioned, the Valley, and certainly the Cambridge, Massachusetts, the state of Texas. I mean, there's lots of innovation centers across the country, which is great. We are a very innovative country. It's in our DNA. But to bring those folks in and not necessarily say, well, okay, we want you to give up your career in academia or at a national lab or whatever doing, but we want you to come in for a period of time. There is a mechanism that's decades old. It's called the Intergovernmental Personnel Mobility Act, or that we call them IPAs, and those innovative agencies, the DARPAs, the NSFs, the NASA, and so on, they have some feds that are sort of more permanent or special appointees into technical positions, but they can come from a 501c3 nonprofit like a university or a national lab or other these federally funded research development centers, or FFRDCs, and they can spend time on that. And so GAO's had a standing order. We've just recently revised that, but we're setting the groundwork for that, because that's how, when you think about DARPA, our opening speaker this morning, DARPA is, in my mind, more of a culture than just an institution. And the culture, a lot of it is creative ideas where meritocracy reigns, and people come in and they spend their time and then they go away. Not in a negative way, they go back and you create networks and you build the ecosystem of innovation around whatever it is, whether it's drone technology or AI or whatever. That's the kind of thing. So with GAO, our model has typically been permanent. For our independence demands, we have those independent, that needs to stay predominant, and it will. But the new wedge of work that we're doing is opening up that aperture, having IPAs going to be coming in, again, because things are changing so rapidly. We want to get the best minds we can for a time, working on the inside boundary for advising the Congress with the best, most, nonpartisan, fact-based information we can, and that's a key way to do that. Others with student programs, internships, et cetera, all of those, it's creating that entire ecosystem that really tends to go well in the innovation centers.
Certainly. So stepping back a little bit, kind of looking more at the broader landscape of government technology, when the conversation around a lot of emerging tech kind of is looked at from almost this geopolitical lens sometimes. So you read something like the National AI Strategy, which came out in February, and there's a lot of different recommendations of things agencies should be doing, prioritizing research in AI and that sort of thing. But the way that it's framed is it's almost like because we need to maintain U.S. leadership in emerging tech.
That's right.
A lot of the conversation is around maintain our leadership over countries like China.
That's right.
So from your perspective, I know we've talked, it's difficult to make that comparison between where the U.S. stands against some global competitors, because money might not always be a definitive thing. So have you guys looked into that at all, and why is that comparison so difficult to make?
Right, so we do have, especially in our oversight portion of the work, we do have a lot of work that's going on in terms of these. How do we maintain or enhance U.S. agility and innovation and competitiveness, right? What's the patent reform that we need? What about Bayh-Dole and that process where you can come up with patents out of the universities and then they can be monetized elsewhere? Is that the way the system is set up, is that doing well with the scale and the speed that we need to operate at? So we are doing pieces of the innovation ecosystem. Even in the foresight, though, in the technology assessment domain, I think part of this is right to your point, Jack, which is how do we think about technologies, again, as they become more general purpose, as they start to disappear, who will have the ecosystem that will reign supreme in terms of its agility and innovation and competitiveness, that sort of domain, and are we in the right place as a nation to do that in today's globalized economy? You mentioned, one of my favorite example here is Silicon Valley, right? It's a place. It's named after an element on the periodic table, right? Why is that? It's because it's where sort of the semiconducting industry, the ecosystem, money did matter. It was both, federal or public sector funds, but a lot of private capital come, and now they're considered, to go there to get venture capital. You go there, it's one of the venture capital places of the world. And so that's why did that come about? Well, the ecosystem became the one that was the predominant one in semiconducting, became agile, became the center of that. And I think that's the kind of way that we have to think about in the same way 5G, AI, et cetera.
Sure. And do you think the government's thinking about it that way right now?
I think no. The short answer is I don't think to that extent, with that aperture and lens in one sense.
Sure.
I mean, part of it is the nature of when you look at the committee structure, they have various jurisdictions, and that's good, but sometimes your strength is also your biggest challenge, because you may be thinking about, well, what does 5G, let's say, do to armed services? Well, that does matter tremendously. We want our armed services to be on top of 5G, to be able to secure 5G, to be agile on that, but 5G is so much bigger than just Air Force or Navy or DoD in general. Right? And so looking at those things in a multi-jurisdictional, cross-cutting sense like we're doing in TA, I think that opening that strategic lens to look at that in a holistic manner, to be able to carry some of these narratives in a meaningful or salient way is what we're aspiring to do.
I got you. So I got one more question for you, and then I want to open it up to the audience. So if you guys have any questions, get them ready. So when we talk about emerging technology, I feel like there's always like a few specific things that people are referring to. So it's like AI,
right.
5G, 3D printing, a lot of the things that have been talked about today.
Right.
But you guys are looking at a lot more than just that. Are there any particular technologies or areas that you think that you're particularly excited about that aren't being talked about as much?
I think so. I think obviously what I call is just the digital technology, this 5G, blockchain, all that are dominating a lot of the discussion, and sometimes it's at the opportunity cost of some of the other things. You heard about 3D printing. That's been something that we've done some work on, and you're seeing at VA. But I think even more so is in the synthetic biology domain, and that's both at the micro scale and the macro scale. I did my dissertation work at Wake Forest University, and since I left, they developed this incredible center for regenerative medicine. It's just unbelievable. It's like science fiction. And my friend who directs it, Tony Atala, Dr. Atala, I'm convinced is going to be a Nobel laureate in medicine someday, but we're talking about printing kidneys from stem cells that are ethically sourced, right? So that you can now, in other words, find cures or get rid of kidney or organ donor lists altogether in theory. Now it's a lot harder to do than to say it, but a lot of this is coming to the fore and using a lot of these digital or design thing, like Dominic was saying, the design centricity is very powerful in this space. But in the life sciences, that's a very disruptive in a positive way about what cost savings, what life savings could you get out of something like that. So I think that's a big deal. We are just about to issue a study on the usage of fresh water in agriculture. And I think agriculture I'm so impressed now about high tech the ag sector really is. When you think about food and ag and so on. And I have a friend who's Tim Gallaudet, who's the director of NOAA, who also talks about the blue economy. It's an understanding how much of economic yield, the GDP, the billions of dollars come out of our oceans. So all just the coastal, the littoral type thing. So understanding ag tech in that broader sense, including the blue, also the green, and I mean the green revolution like it was talked about in the 60s under LBJ, I think there's a huge amount there in terms of what's going on. No other technology, if you think about agriculture from the 20th century, succeeded in having its inputs and more than doubling its outputs. And there's still, by the way, room at the top when you start talking about precision ag and so on. So we're about to come out with a study on freshwater usage in agriculture, and because you're talking about, we irrigate things incredibly here. We're victims of success. We're an incredible country in terms of our ag sector. But how do we get more yield, but yet with more, in a more sustainable way, with less resource and things, given the concerns about stress to freshwater, the aquifers and so on. And again, we just can't irrigate and draw from the ground infinitely. How do we think about that? How do we apply drone technology to manage the fields? This is going on now. The robotics on the farm, again, to continue to exponentiate the output of the yield of the American farmer is incredible. So those are just two sort of life sciencey, ag tech, are just, again, in the non-digital space that I would put out there. There are a number of others.
No, for sure, for sure. So we have a couple minutes left. If anyone in the audience has any questions.
How do you see the development of laser technologies and forms of scanning, processing, and manufacturing impacting American technological maintenance and dominance?
Laser scanning, so in other words, advanced sensors and those kind of things. I see that. So short answer is I think there's a lot of growth in that area in terms of ongoing impact of those things. Just supply chain management, manufacturing floor and innovation, having more of that to tie into sort of the IoT, Internet of Things type idea. To have these things is I think incredible. I didn't mention manufacturing sector, but you could go on to YouTube and type in Tesla factory and you'll see what putting together an electric car looks like now. The manufacturing sector has changed dramatically. It's very high tech, and so these sort of these supply chain, these sensor systems are, I think, again, are continuing to give, I think, producers tools to better manage, to better produce their output, and increase their margins.
I'm on the site right now, but I was hoping you could tell me a little bit more about the 5G report you're working on. What's the timeline for that? It sounds like you will be addressing things like cybersecurity, but maybe give us a little bit more idea of the scope as well.
Sure, thanks. So the 5G report, great question. Just again, saying 5G is just a phenomenally, colossally broad scope thing. We don't suffer from any ambition of trying to get a big cut at this, but our typical TA structure on the report is looking at, okay, let's just baseline what the technologies are. 5G, like other hyped technologies like AI, oftentimes you start to lose the ground truth of where are we actually, what's going on in terms of the technology. There is a now of 5G and still a not yet. It's mostly a not yet at this point, although again, if we came back here in a year, we might be amazed at what new applications and things come out of this. So it's looking at the baselining, where we are with the technology. First of all, just explaining what it is. And I've been spending an amazing amount of time going to the Hill just doing sit-downs like with Jack. It was in this mode, just say, let me just tell you what 5G is. So again, to sort of de-hype some things and talk about what it is. It is disruptive, right? This isn't a curmudgeonly Luddite type narrative. It is going to be a big deal. It is and will be a big deal. But we're baselining it, then we're getting into the opportunities of it and the challenges. Again, it's dialectical. We're a Socratic institution. We want to go out and speak the truth on various issues, and there's all upsides and downsides to this. And that can be economic, vocational. It could be, again, to privacy, civil liberties. It's certainly going to be in cybersecurity because the Internet of Things, to some people, like to some CIOs, that's the Internet of Threats, right? And justly so, especially as you move computing and communications from the core to the edge, which is a key thing about the new 5G redesign. So the spectrum management is another piece of that, the competitiveness and innovation on that, the supply chain issues for the United States are all part of that particular narrative, and that leads into the strategic implications and policy options around what do we do about 5G to maximize the upsides and minimize the downsides. So very broad. We have sister teams doing 5G in defense type work, and that's an important thing as well. And then we also have sort of our oversight team that looks at the FCC. How is our regulatory structure adjusting or managing this? What's the rulemaking on these sort of things, particularly on spectrum between mid-band and high-band? And right now, mid-band is deemed the way to go globally. The US is pursuing some high-band. We're the only thing. But in today's domain where our IP is at risk at times in this globalized economy, it might be innovated here, but then developed and monetized elsewhere, and that's a concern. So those are there's actually multiple studies, but the TA will focus on baselining, opportunities, challenges, strategic implications, policy options. It will be, it's expected to come out in, I would estimate, 2Q of 2020.
All right. I think that's all the time we have.
Great.
So Tim, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
All right, I'll just close out. Thank you all so much for attending today, staying with us. Thanks to our audience online. This is available for your colleagues if you want it. We are recording it, so it's great if you missed anything or you want to share anything. We'll have that available shortly. I want to thank our underwriters, Accenture, Pluralsight, Hootsuite, and also to Decode for helping us today. Just thank you so much. Hopefully you learned a lot about not only the new technology, but the procurement and the workforce needs that kind of surround the technology. And so thank you all so much, and we hope to see you in a future NextGov event. Thank you.